Choosing between all of the White Lotus seasons almost feels like picking out my favorite child, but screw it, I don't even have children, and we all have favorites anyways. Hello, welcome if you're new here. My name is Malaya and I like to make video essays. And it goes without saying that I am a huge fan of the White Lotus and the world that Mike White has been able to make. Given that the series is an anthology, I thought we could do the impossible today, picking out the best season. To do this, I thought it'd be helpful to examine the show through 3 different lenses that I believe really go into the nitty-gritty as to what makes the show so unique. So this is going to be 1, theme and social commentary. What are the main themes addressed in each season, and how well does the show execute these themes through its narrative and characters? 2, character development. Are the characters multidimensional and complex? Do any of the characters have a significant transformation or evolution throughout the season? And finally, 3, conflict and resolution. How well are the conflicts established and built upon? Are the resolutions satisfying, and do they align with the character arcs and story themes? And does the season leave room for interpretation or offer clear closure? We won't even be talking about the theme songs because I think we all know who the clear winners are. Sorry, season 3, you were snubbed. By the end of this video, I'll be making my choice for what I think is the best season, but believe me when I say this was in no way an easy choice. Myself and probably many of you out there know at this point that the way the show functions is similar to that of a murder mystery, but what the creators have been able to do is take those same elements and completely spin it on its head. The genre of murder mystery actually had its traces back to Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote The Murders in the Rue Morgue, and of course we can't forget Sherlock Holmes, a character created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The appeal of this genre allows the audience to be fully immersed as to figure out who kills who. While the series draws on these classic murder mysteries made famous by these writers, The White Lotus uses a fresh setting, a luxurious vacation destination, to subvert expectations. Though it's easy to categorize this series as a murder mystery, it's important to note that the game of whodunit isn't actually the main premise of the show. Though the first scenes of the season presents us with the placement of a dead body, inevitably having all of us draw up our own theories as to who killed who, and being our own little detectives, our attention slowly shifts. Somehow throughout the course of the season, the murder almost becomes secondary to the commentary that's happening, that's talking about wealth, status, and human flaws. In an interview with Mike White in 2021, he explains his approach to the show where he says, "As someone who doesn't really traffic in the world of mysteries and dead bodies, I was like, it's such a trope at this point. All of these limited series where there's a dead body at the beginning, I was like, you want your dead body? Here's your dead body." I also felt like it was helpful in the sense that I knew I wanted to create a show that had this kind of cognitive dissonance of beautiful people and a beautiful location, but then there's this sense of dread, of blood in the mouth. Something dangerous was going to happen. The introductory season of The White Lotus felt like that piece of chocolate in an assorted box that you didn't know you needed, but you're so glad you took anyways. Safe to say, we were in for quite the treats. For this season, one of the main themes that were addressed was colonialism and the exploitation of land, which was really addressed with a lot of the interactions between the hotel staff as well as the guests. The effects of this can really be felt with 2 of the characters, Lonnie and Kai, who are 2 native Hawaiians who work at the hotel. With Lonnie, we follow her as it's her very first day on the job, but is later revealed she's actually pregnant and subsequently gives birth on hotel grounds. Although her appearance is very brief, I think her storyline really delves into the dark reality that a lot of native Hawaiians likely face. Despite being in their homeland, as a group, native Hawaiians have disproportionately lower incomes and high poverty rates in comparison to all of the other ethnic groups within their state. For Lonnie, hers is a tale of desperation, as she really felt like she needed to take the job in order to alleviate herself and her partner in what was a dire financial situation that they found themselves in. As for Kai, he's what I think of as a character in enemy territory. After getting closer to Paula and revealing that the hotel grounds was actually once his family's land, and how his family unfortunately can't afford lawyers to fight the powers that be, we really start to empathize with his character and feel bad for him. And in a way, Lonnie and Kai's story is very similar to one another. These are two native locals who likely exhausted all other options and had to make amends with the fact that they were going to be working on this resort that directly affected not only their own livelihoods, but the livelihoods of their people as well as their homeland. Another central theme that was addressed was the commentary on wealth and privilege, mainly within a lot of the hotel guests. If you think about it, a week-long vacation at a 5-star resort is a luxury afforded only to a small handful group of people. For the guests, Shane, Nicole, and Tanya are among some of the wealthiest guests and the ones who had the means to take themselves and their family members on this vacation in the first place. Throughout the season, we can really see how their privilege manifests through a lot of their interactions, and as an extension has also affected others around them. For Mark, his privilege shows in the way that he himself feels like a victim to these new progressive beliefs that dispel the traditional ideas of patriarchy. For Olivia, she is one of those characters that grew up in a life full of wealth and privilege, but feels the need to judge her parents and other wealthy individuals out there. But I feel like she doesn't really fully comprehend what the struggle actually means and has no real understanding of what Paula and these locals may be going through. I read this piece by Michael J. Valves on his blog Tumbleweed Writes, where he discusses more about this idea of white privilege and how the characters relate to it. For instance, in Tanya's case, she represents the way white privilege can be disguised by good intentions as well as the obliviousness to this process. In the case of Rachel, she represents the anxiety, identity crisis, and allure of white privilege. And as for Shane, he represents the immaturity of white privilege and the emotional stuntedness and lack of empathy that comes with being spoiled. So for my rating of season 1's theme and social commentary, I would give them a solid 5 out of 5 stars, mainly because of the way that they address this topic in such a entertaining and, importantly for me, humorous way. I feel like when you bring up these topics, they can be very dark and heavy and something that not a lot of people may want to hear. But with the way that everything was written, it was done so in a very refreshing way, and it was also digestible for the common watcher. And also, I feel like all of the characters each had something to say about these themes, so they were all pretty much intertwined with the central message of this season. For their character development, I would give them a 4 out of 5 stars. Out of all the characters, I think the men of the Mossbacher family had some of the more satisfying character developments. Mark, of course, with the revival of his manhood and his ability to protect and defend his wife, Nicole. In the beginning of the season, it seemed as if he was emasculated, which mainly had to do with the affair and Nicole's resentment of him for it. I think that Mark's journey was one of masculinity. With the discovery of his father being gay, his whole perception of his life has been completely shattered and feels as if he's been lied to this whole time. He really had to grapple with this and had to deal with this on his own terms, which of course he might have done with a little bit too many Mai Tais, but that's besides the point. Although the revelation of his father being gay may forever haunt him, by the end of the season, he's been able to resolve the problems he's been having with his own masculinity through Nicole and his own family. As for Quinn, he had one of the most surprising arcs for me, mainly because, I mean, in the beginning of the season, he's painted out to be this young man that's just obsessed with his phone and has no personality outside of it and has a really deep attachment to it and seems as if he can't really function without it. But by the end of the season, I feel like he really grows into this person that didn't seem possible for him. And because of the fact that he was without his phone because it was lost or damaged on the beach, so he was forced to look outward and really appreciate the beauty of what Hawaii had to offer him, and thus changed his outlook on his life. Out of all the characters, he had the most progression because he was actually fully immersed in local culture. His change is so satisfying because he just wants to live life, and we can see this with the way that he's interacting with the guys who are rowing the canoe, and at the end really wants to be part of something special like the hakulea, and ultimately decides not to go back home with his parents and stay here in Hawaii. Now, as for Rachel. I was really disappointed in Rachel's ending because I feel like throughout the progression of the show, it made it seem as if she was actually going to be done with Shane for good and that she didn't want to live the life of being a trophy wife. But I can see her perspective in all this, mainly because all that she has going for her is her mediocre journalist career. And I think the words of Kitty really resonated with her when she gave that advice of, just be happy. I feel like she would have rather chose to force herself to be happy living beside Shane as opposed to forcing herself to be happy in a career that may not be as fulfilling as she thought it was going to be. It's a tough choice because she's already married, and I think she would much rather live the comforts of being Shane's wife. Now, as for the conflict resolution, I would give them a 4 out of 5. I'm not gonna lie, that whole plot line with Paula was such a mess. I feel like she didn't really think it through the consequences of her actions and just went all in. They could have done it a little bit better, and I can understand why Paula might have wanted to help Kai given his situation. But with the way that it ended and Olivia forgiving her, I feel like you can't go through something like that as friends and come out of it on the other side, because she basically showed her true colors and how she felt about Olivia and her family towards the end in the scenes in the airport where it showcases the two with their noses in books. It's made out to be that they're friends again, but it is up to our interpretation. But it does seem unrealistic to want to remain buddies after something like that. Now, the death of Armand was heartbreaking, but dare I say, necessary? Now hear me out. I feel like given all of the tension that Jane and Armand had throughout the season, something was bound to happen to them. And I feel like his death felt almost like a release from all the suffering he's had, given the fact that he had this whole descent into his madness and his substance abuse. It was inevitable for it to all come to a climax. Looking back, I feel like it would have been so predictable for Shane to kill off Rachel, and I'm glad the writers caught on to that and didn't do that, as the husband kill wife trope is just so overdone. Although Armand's job wasn't the worst gig in the world, it does get a bit tiring after a while if you personally know what it's like to be working customer service. Sure, would it have been better for Armand not to relapse and get better? Yes, but this is a drama filled with murder, and death is always around the corner. Season 2 gives off the vibe of, this isn't my first rodeo, honey. Because we already had the framework set up from season 1, so we knew what we were getting ourselves into. Kind of. For season 2, the main themes that were addressed was this idea of sexual politics and desire set in Italy. Again, with Michael J. Valve's dissection of season 2, he goes deeper into this sort of analysis of sexual politics and how it relates to all of the characters. Take Portia, for example. Her story arc revolves around her desperate search for excitement and romance, leading her to make some questionable decisions. At first, it looked as if there was a romance blossoming with her and Albie, but he just wasn't cutting it out for her. Sure, he was the textbook nice guy, but that wasn't what she was looking for. Instead, she finds that with Jack. Her storyline and that desire for really wanting to experience all that life has to offer really hit home for me because she did express amidst the pandemic, she had that craving for genuine human connection and adventure. What initially appears as a harmless zest for life quickly turns sour as she delves more and more into Jack's lifestyle. For Jack, it seemed as if there was this never-ending chase for an adventure, but she got exactly what she asked for and then some. Perhaps the most interesting group dynamic from season 2 was our favorite group of swingers. For Harper and Ethan, their storyline really revolves around this idea of marital dissatisfaction and sexual frustration that's built up after being with your significant other for a long period of time. Their dynamic heavily contrasts Cameron and Daphne, who have a very overly intimate and sexually charged relationship that is so in your face. And it seemed as if Harper and Ethan's intimacy issues was something that they were going to have to sort out themselves, up until Harper, of course, opens up a can of worms and openly admits the lack of sex and intimacy within the relationship and the ways in which Ethan sort of satisfies himself. And Cameron, taking note of this issue, is really quick to assert his power over both Harper and Ethan, showcasing his insatiable hunger for pleasure. Between all 4 of these characters, the question of infidelity looms large amongst all of them, but remains unsaid and swept up under the rug. Then there's Lucia and Mia, who were some very strong characters and I think were really integral in moving the plot forward as they each dipped their toes into the different group dynamics within all of the different groups. Their characters are really meant to represent different aspects of sex work revolving around power dynamics, exploitation, and ultimately empowerment. Honestly, these 2 were so fun to watch on screen as they understood what it meant to use their sexuality to their advantage and use it as a way of mobilizing themselves and ultimately coming out on top. As for the DeGrasso men, they were able to add another layer as they represented 3 generations of men and their outlook of women. Having each grown up in a different time period, we can see the way that they approach relationships and sex through their interactions amongst themselves as well as with other characters. For Bert, the oldest among the group, who came from a more older generation where men always held more power, he simply did as he pleased. And Dominic depicts the effects of living under that belief as his father's infidelities skewed his perception of relationships and in turn harming his very own family. As for Albie, who represents this new wave of progressive men, he judges these outdated ways of thinking from both of the men in his life and seeks out to uplift the women in his life. However, in a way, Albie seems to reject parts of his masculinity as he makes it out to be he's the better man in all this and doesn't acknowledge the way that men inherently are. And finally, Valentina's arc really was able to showcase the sort of sexual exploration she went under and her openness to receiving genuine love and connection. So with that, I believe that season 2 deserves a 5 out of 5 star rating for their theme and social commentary. For season 2, it was also when we really started to see Tanya's character shine, as it was a continuation of her story from season 1. She had a fair share of very hilarious, iconic lines that really made her a memorable character. Tanya was really a woman that craved genuine connections but couldn't quite figure it out. She latches onto people quickly, as we saw her friendship with Belinda in the first half of season 1, then moving on to Greg towards the end of that same season. Meanwhile, in season 2, she's pretty much abandoned by Greg. Given a woman of her wealth and status, it's easy to see why she might have a hard time trusting people, as a lot of people might automatically look at her and see a cash cow, and that leaves her in a pretty lonely position. Her character really embodies that of a tragic character, because right before her final moments, you can't help but root for her as she's courageously trying to save herself but goes out in a pretty absurd way. The isolation is central to her character, and her tragic end feels like the culmination of everything she's been through, especially when you recall her line from season 1, "Death is the last immersive experience." Portia too had her very own development, as everything that she ever wanted in the beginning of the season came to her on a nice silver platter. However, this unfolds to completely backfire on her, as what she thought she wanted, she was better off without. The allure of spontaneity with Jack and their adventures quickly dried up, as she no longer had that structure that she was accustomed to. At least for me, when I'm on vacation, I know that it's gonna end at some point, but there's a tiny part of me that feels excited to get home. I think I'm talking mainly about being homesick, but knowing that at home, what's waiting for me is that life that I've built for myself and the stableness and just the routine of every day. I feel like there's something to be said about monotony and how it is good for us because we know what to expect. I think for Portia, she didn't really know what to expect out of her vacation, and she got tired of it. And I think she just wanted that sort of structure that goes missing when each of us go on vacation. For her, she really feels the weight of all the bad decisions that she made throughout the course of her time there. And I think she comes to a true awakening when she's ultimately spared by Jack and given the chance to walk away unscathed. Lucia and Mia were among some of the characters that really remained true to themselves up until the very end. They both have a good understanding of what their role is in sex work, and instead of pitying themselves, they were smart enough to take their situation and be able to have the upper hand in all this, as exemplified in the way that Lucia basically scammed Alvy. They knew what was required of them to play into the game of satisfying the hotel guests. For the character development in season 2, I'll give them a 5 out of 5. The season 2 finale felt as if everything was wrapped up and that there wasn't any loose ends. For Harper and Ethan's ending, it does leave a little bit of a bad taste in your mouth, as it essentially took infidelity for them to reconnect. My mind was absolutely blown away when somebody pointed out this Easter egg in the season 2 title sequence with what appears to be Daphne and Ethan hooking up on the island. Now, it's up to your own interpretation of this, but I mean, the guy is wearing a hat, and it sure as hell looks like Ethan. But ultimately, in the end, I think Harper and Ethan really became the sort of people that they despised the most, without consciously doing so, of course. It's clear that Daphne and Cameron dabble in cheating, but for Harper and Ethan to have their own little taste of it leaves you wondering if they've become better for it as a couple, and whether or not they have resolved their intimacy issues. If they hadn't gone on vacation, they likely would still be experiencing those issues, and who knows if they would inevitably resort to infidelity to fill that void of being desired. As for the DeGrasso men, their final scene really encapsulates that boys will be boys trope, as they will always be enamored by the presence of a beautiful woman and can't help but stare. For season 2's conflict resolution, I would also give them a 5 out of 5. So season 3 takes us to Thailand, where we explore themes of spirituality and identity. The hotel resort is a perfect location, as they really offer up this commercialized way of approaching wellness. Their whole branding of the hotel is to completely unplug and give us your phones, where they also offer restorative massages, yoga studios, and meditation centers, all as a way to be completely present and as an attempt to market becoming enlightened. Some guests approach spirituality with real interest, while others with more of a superficial consumption. This is most apparent with Piper's character as she borders between these two spheres. She's made out to be someone who is so zen and tranquil, all until that facade she carries with her burst towards the very end. Her character seems very representative of that type of woman who goes to yoga classes, only eats organic food, and is entranced by the idea of Thailand for its spirituality. And when her mom tells her to try living in the monastery for a night, we quickly find out that it's not all it's cracked up to be. If you're living this way that you are at the monastery, you can understand why they take on this spiritual way of thinking. You're not really afforded a lot of comfort or luxuries, but a step back towards just the bare necessities of life. So you're kind of forced to adopt this mindset of detachment over material things. For Piper, it's clear that she's able to only accept this type of lifestyle under her own conditions and where she can easily fall back on the convenience of living under her family's umbrella of affluence. This consumption of finding the authenticity within Thai culture is also seen within Lori, Jacqueline, and Kate. After being offended for being sent to a resort with a bunch of elders, paradigm is flipped when they are on the streets of Thailand, filled with children celebrating the Songkran festival. After an unpleasant experience, they then are quick to reclaim their status as being adults, yelling at the children for spraying them with their water guns. Ultimately reveals their own misunderstanding and disconnect of the real culture that Thailand offers. Despite having very little screen time and being a secondary character, we can't go denying that Frank absolutely stole the spotlight with his very wild monologue that I think left a lot of us shocked and screaming at our TV screens. His journey into sex addiction, cross-dressing, and path to rehab through religion delves into how too much of a hedonistic life can essentially throw you off the deep end. And surprisingly, I think Tim was actually one of the few characters that was able to achieve his own sort of enlightenment, but we'll go ahead and talk more about him and his character development later. But for the theme and social commentary, I would give this season a 4 out of 5. And my only qualm about this season's theme and social commentary is that it wasn't as integrated into all of the characters as much as it was in the previous seasons. For Valentine and his little posse, I couldn't really see the way in which their story tied in with the theme of spirituality and identity. In comparison to the other seasons, that was a little bit of a weak point, but they are secondary characters after all, so I can understand why they might not be as connected. Back to Tim and Saxon. They had some of the most interesting character developments within the series. Unbeknownst to everybody, I was really surprised at the fact that they were able to take Saxon and make him out to be the most likable character of the show by the very end of the season. At first, he reminded me a bit of Shane in season 1 because he was very douchey, and you know that he grew up in lots of wealth and privilege, and that he had no shame in flaunting off his personality and the way that he grew up. But through the influence of both Chelsea and in some part Lachlan, who ultimately confessed that the reason why that whole situation happened on the boat is because he wanted to satisfy him, which is just a wild remark. But anyways, I think Chelsea had the most impact on Saxon's character because of the way that she opened him up to spirituality in a way that he has probably never been exposed to in his life. And throughout the show, he was very vulnerable and open about his own identity, especially when he confronted his dad, Tim, about if anything was going wrong. He was really quick to confess that the role that he has in his father's company makes up a good bulk of who he is as a person, and that he's essentially nothing without it. And I think he has a lot of self-awareness because of that. Safe to say, Saxon really changed for the better, and I like the approach that they had with his character. As we can see in the very last scene with him and his siblings, he's reading this book titled Start Where You Are, which was likely given to him by Chelsea, which he sure as hell needs given the shit show he's gonna come back to at home. Now, Tim, on the other hand, had a different type of change. Personally, one of my favorite scenes in all of the season was Tim's interaction with the monk, which was very fascinating because I feel like these two are representative of the Western and Eastern ideals. With the monk at the monastery, he's all about detachment and letting go and saying no to material things. And contrasting that with Tim's character, who's the embodiment of, I want to say, capitalism. The man built himself up. I'm not sure if he grew up with lots of money, but I think it was hinted that he scaled up his business to the point where he was able to grant this sort of lifestyle to his family. And his character is all about flaunting your wealth and status, and something that's really important within Western culture. Throughout the duration of the conversation with Tim and the monk, he really internalizes the idea of death being like a happy return and it being brought home, and really ran with the idea. His whole thinking of it really came down to this idea of mercy killing, as he was really gauging out whether or not his family could live without money and just how much value that they did place on their wealth. He was ultimately conducting a test to find out which one of his family members he's going to take with him. Now, thankfully, he did have a change of heart, and he ultimately came to the conclusion that he was strong enough to face the challenges that were awaiting for him back at home, and that no matter what happened, the most important thing is that he has his family by his side. And I think that's a really nice, heartfelt sentiment that we can all walk away with. For the character development for season 3, I'll have to give them a 4 out of 5. My only reservations about the character development is with Lachlan, because I'm not sure how he's going to turn out and the sort of lessons that he learned coming out of this vacation. I did notice that a lot of people pointed out that their positions shift from the beginning. So where Lachlan was in the beginning, he's now where Saxon is in terms of the placement of each of the siblings. And he has almost the same stature as Saxon in the beginning, as he seems very to himself and has the shades on. I'm not fully bought into the idea that he's going to become a Saxon 2.0. As for Rick, his plotline felt a little questionable. In large part, it had to do with the chain of events that led him to be in Sritala's home in the first place. I felt like it was a little weak because he came up with this lie that he got in connection with this movie producer, director, which was ultimately going to be Frank, and that he wanted Sritala to become one of the main stars of that movie production. First of all, it made absolutely no sense for Rick to leave Frank completely in the dark as to the sort of movie that they were making and Sritala's importance in all of this. I mean, he could have told the man to watch a little bit of her movies just so he could have a little bit of context, but no. That man was stressing. There wasn't a single ounce of thought or consideration to, make their lie a little bit more believable. And honestly, it was a bit of a hard watch with Frank, Rick, Sritala, and Sritala's husband, because It was just a stressful environment, but I think that might have been the point for the writers, as we as the audience can feel the stress that Frank might also be going through. And even for Sri Tala, I feel like she was made out to be this very powerful and influential person within Thailand. But she got hoodwinked by Rick and Frank, and they made her out to be a little bit more naive than what was initially proposed. Her character was redeemed at the end, though, as she ultimately had the power to order Guy Talk to kill Rick due to the death of her husband. Now, as for Rick and Chelsea as a couple, I think they were a great representation of what it means to be star-crossed lovers, doomed from the very start. We saw a small glimpse of hope as Rick reassured Chelsea that they were going to be together forever, but looking back, it seemed as if they were never going to get their happy ending in the first place. For Rick, he was very head set on this path of vengeance to the point that it was just all consuming and it was all that he could think about. And that's ultimately what led him to his very death. He couldn't get over the fact that this man supposedly killed off his father, but ended up being like a Darth Vader moment where he actually was his father, and that it came full circle in the fact that he became his father's killer. So there's that. And for Chelsea, because she was so tied up with Rick, if something bad happened to Rick, something was bound to happen to her. Her story feels like a cautionary tale of the dangers of latching on to someone too deeply, because you'll ultimately suffer the consequences of it. And as for Guy Talk, I think it didn't make too much sense for him not to just rat out Valentine and his posse, because if you think about it, it's pretty much a win-win situation for him all around. Firstly, he would have successfully identified the true identities of the people who had robbed the hotel. He also got promoted to being one of the top bodyguards for Sri Tala. And add on top of that, he finally won the heart of Mook. He could have catched the dub, all I'm saying. And now as for Kate, Jacqueline, and Lori's group, I'm not gonna lie, their relationship dynamic puzzles me. For Lori's monologue, I'll have to admit that her delivery of that was very powerful, but there were some conflicting perspectives as to the ending. While some see Lori as the voice of reason, others also feel as if she's just enabling a toxic group dynamic. It's quite the friendship that these women have, and it still perplexes me how they function. And I'd love to hear your comments and what you think about their dynamic. But so far, my interpretation of it is that given that they're middle-aged women and that they've been friends for so long, that despite the fact that they've been through a lot of drama and betrayal and gossiping, they just can't let go the thought of cutting off friends that they've known for so long in their lives. Because we as the audience know that these three women have been friends since, elementary or middle school. So they've been in each other's lives for a really long time, even though they haven't been as present as they would like to. Finally, for Belinda, not much has to be said, but thank goodness she got a good ending and one that she deserved. So for season 3's conflict resolution, I'll have to give them a 4 out of 5 stars. Now that we've got all of our ratings in, our winner is, drumroll please, season 2 is the best season, with season 1 being runner-up and season 3 coming in 3rd place. Now keep in mind, these are my opinions. That's my opinion! I know each and every one of you watching this video are going to have your very own opinions. If you agree with me, great. If you disagree, great. If you want to plead your case in the comments and let me know your thoughts about what you think the best season is in your very own rankings, then I encourage you to comment down below. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here. I feel like this is going to be one of my more longer videos, so if you made it this far, I'm really glad you're here. I did want to cut out some time to say we're at 1K subscribers. I've been doing this YouTube thing for a while now, and to think there's 1,000 of you guys watching is insane. And I'm really grateful for the community that we've built. And I thought, as a celebration, we could pop some confetti. So let me put this mic down. Okay, ready? Ready? 1, 2. 1, 2. What's up? Oh my god. That was so cute. Thank you guys so much. That's enough of this sap sesh. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, cool cats.